Chinese tech giant Huawei says its revenue grew by almost 25% in the first 9 months of the year. Its revenues jumped to more than $86 billion with a profit margin increase of 8.7%.
Now that happened even though the US lobbied allies worldwide to avoid the company's telecom gear over security concerns and amid a trade conflict between China and the US. Its smartphone shipments surpassed 185 million units in the same period.
But Huawei had said the US sanctions would knock about $10 billion off its revenue this year. Last year, the company crossed $100 billion in annual revenue for the first time.
Huawei is the world's leading supplier of telecoms networking equipment and the #2 global smartphone vendor. And for more on this and a closer look at Huawei results, we have with us Jin Shengtao, a research analyst from Canalys. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me here.
So it seems like the numbers, Huawei hasn't been impacted too much by these sanctions. We've got revenue growth of 24.4%. Talk us through it. Why is that?
All right, so the quarterly revenue for this quarter has remained the same level as last quarter. We just saw a slight dip of 1.3%. But if you look at their two business segments, the carrier segment, they have largely been unaffected. So it has signed over 10 additional 5G commercial deals with countries. And of the 60 deals it has signed so far, about half of them come from European countries, right? And about the 400,000 5G stations it has shipped, 3/4 of them are shipped after the US ban. So Huawei definitely shows it's very resilient. And on the smartphone, on the consumer business segment, Huawei has shipped over 67 million smartphones this quarter, the highest it has shipped in a single quarter. And in China, it has shipped 41.5 million shipments, and that's about 43% of the market share there. So Huawei definitely shows resilience amidst the trade war.
All right, so Huawei showing resilience, you mentioning that. So what have the US restrictions actually done for Huawei, if that's the case? Because, there were actually fears that this trade restrictions could push its smartphone units revenue lower, and they're saying here by about $10 billion this year.
Right. So $10 billion, that's about 20 to 30 million smartphone shipments. And immediately after the US ban on Huawei, we have seen in many regions in APEC, in Europe, Middle East, Africa, we saw a sharp decline in Huawei's shipments. So should the trade ban not be there, we think that Huawei could definitely ship an additional 20 to 30 million more smartphones.
So do you think going forward then that they will be able to survive, not just survive, but thrive in spite of these sanctions? Then they seem to have strong domestic growth for sure.
Right, so Huawei is definitely going to get stronger in its Chinese market. It targets to gain over 50% market share in China by the end of the year, and Huawei is on a good trajectory to achieve that. And in the overseas market, Huawei has still remained relevant despite of its inability to use Google apps and softwares. So far, we've seen that Huawei's shipment to Europe has surged in the third quarter because Huawei's older portfolios, such as the P30 and Mate 20 series, are still competitive, and these phones are unaffected by the trade ban, right?
Okay, so smartphone shipments, they were up, I'm looking at the numbers here, 26% year on year. Do you think Huawei will continue to rely on its smartphones or actually start to diversify elsewhere?
Right, so Huawei is still strong in the carrier business, and in the consumer business, Huawei is very strong when it comes to building its own system on chips, SoCs, and it also holds quite a large amount of patents, so it can, considering selling its patent or, coming up with some licensing deals like what the Qualcomm is doing, and it's also seen tremendous growth in other consumer products such as the PCs and the TVs and, other electronic products in the IoTs. Yeah, so definitely there are many revenue sources for Huawei to consider.
Okay, so they're not going away anytime soon, and I suppose if a deal is worked out between the US and China, then they will just continue to go from strength to strength. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today. Jin Shengtao, research analyst from Canalys.